G'day guys, and welcome back to my lab and to our 5th lesson in our Zero to Zelda tutorial series in Godot 4. So let's have a quick look at what we've already done so far, and then we'll talk about what we're getting up to in this lesson. So what have we done so far? Well, hopefully your map is looking something like this one. So what we've done is we've created our project, we have created our basic tile map, we've set up our player character, we've given that player character movement and an animation through scripting, we've set up our follow camera, and most recently we set up our collision shapes on our player and a couple of trees and rocks. In this lesson, we're going to have a look at Y sorting. If you're not sure what that is, I'll leave Homer here for a bit of a hint. And after we've got our Y sorting sorted out, I want to do a whole bunch of improvements to our tile map, which will set us up for some things we're going to do further down the track. Gating. What is gating? So in the context of the Legend of Zelda, the original, of course, gating is... It's like these soft techniques to stop players going where they're really not ready to go yet. So things that you need, well, right at the very start, you're dropped in the middle of nothing and you can go into a cave and get a sword. If you don't go into the cave and get a sword, and instead you go off to the right or the left and start taking on enemies, you're going to die super quick. So you could say that's an initial little gate there to sort of be like, oh, okay. So in Zelda, we need to collect items that give us things that we can use. So there's some learning about the game that takes place there as well as preventing the player from advancing without learning that. Further on in it, we've got candles we need to see in the dark. You can't exactly take on those things in the dark without the candle. We've got, there's a ladder you can get, which helps you cross over water. There's a raft. There's all these different techniques that have been used by Zelda with items. There's also what we call environmental gating. So using rivers or dense forests you can't go through and things like that to stop players going in that direction. You want them to go this direction. And another one would be ability. So it's very difficult to take on enemies that are near the end of the game when you're at the start of the game because you don't have the right weapon, you don't have the right number of hearts and all that sort of stuff, right? So these are all gating techniques. And the one I want you to focus on today in your must may might will be the environmental gating. We're going to set up some extra collision shapes on some of our tiles, and I want you to use that to set up your map with those flowing directional sort of paths with different branches and things like that, but using those rocks and trees and cliffs to channel your player where you want them to go. So that's gating. That's the game development technique I want you to be aware of today, and I'm hoping we can implement that in this particular lesson as well. So we've talked about non-linear progression, gating, that sense of adventure. There's all these different things that I want you guys to remember, because when we get to the end, you're going to need to show me how you've implemented those things. So what are we doing today? We are setting up our Y sorting, we are improving our tile map, and hopefully we're also going to implement some of that non-linear progression and gating that we've talked about. Why do we want to do these things? Well, we want to make it so our graphics are all, organized and aligned correctly. And also we want our map to inspire that curiosity that we talked about in our earlier episode as well. The skills we're going to need this time is, well, we're going to need to implement our Y sorting and understand and apply some of those game design techniques we've been talking about. Success today, well, that's going to look like you've got a map where your player walks behind the trees and the rocks, is in front of them when it needs to be, and also we're going to have various other barriers and boundaries and things that we've created over this lesson. So what even is Y sorting? We had that picture of Homer disappearing into the bushes as your hint. Well, essentially, Y sorting, if we think about, earlier we talked about our Y axis, and if you remember back to doing your maths, your Cartesian planes or your graphs and things, Y to the sky. So our Y axis is the one that is up and down the page, and our X axis is across the page. So our vertical axis is our Y, and our horizontal axis is our X. Y sorting is just organizing which things appear in front of which other things on that vertical axis. So if we're standing lower than a tree, we should appear in front of the tree. But if we walk around behind the tree, we want to appear behind the tree without being able to walk through the tree as well. So that's it in a nutshell. And we're going to go through and we're going to set that up for our objects, for our player, and a few other things. And that's going to make our map just instantly look so much more interesting and realistic when we have those sorts of things working. And then we're going to move on and start tackling how we implement some of those other things as well. let's get stuck into it. So jump into Godot, get your world scene up on the screen, ready to go, and then we're going to dive in. Remember, you can always just watch this through and then pause it during the must, may, might, and then go back and rewind and all that sort of stuff as well. Don't feel like you need to keep up with me, but I do try and go slow enough so that it's easy to pick up what I'm doing, and I try and explain. For some of you, I'm sure I'm over-explaining, but I would much rather make this accessible to everyone than only the few people that actually already know a lot of these things. So just bear with it. We'll get to where you need to get to as well, and make sure that if you think this is easy, you're focusing on the might sections in our must, may, might and actually extending yourselves. All right, so our why sorting, first thing I want to do is we're going to make our player a child node of our tile map. So if you remember when we created our nodes, some of them would just be down the page, but others would, tab across, they're a child. So if you look at our nodes here in the world scene, I'm going to grab the player one and just drag it over the tile map, and then what it does is it just moves it across and makes it a child node of the player map, and that just makes our Y sorting a bit easier. So next what I want to do is actually click on our player scene, which you should have as an open tab. If it's not, you can open it down in the file explorer by double clicking down there, heading across, and what we want to do, we've set up those collisions and things, but if we go a bit further down the page, we've got this canvas item, visibility, ordering, all this sort of stuff. In there is a little tick box called Y sorting enabled. So let's click that, and let's also change the Z index to 1. All right, so we're ticking Y sorting and we're increasing the Z from 0 to 1. And that's all we want to do in our player. I'm just going to save that for now. I'm going to click back to my world scene. Then I'm going to click on my tile map. And now what we're going to do is have a bit of a play around here. So here's our tile sets, etc. We've got all these layers that were created, I think, in our last lesson, right? So we've got grass, then we've got rocks and trees. We're going to do similar to what we just did to our player, to our rocks and trees. So over here, we've got our layers expanded up there. So all of our layers are showing. Now, if we go to our trees one that we made, you can see it's enabled. Oh, that's good. It's turned on. We're not modulating it. Don't worry about that. Y sort enable. Yes, we do want Y sort enabled on. And we want our Z index to be 1, just like with the player. And we want to do the same thing again for the rocks. So now we've got our trees, Y sort enabled and Z index 1. Our rocks, Y sort enabled and Z index 1. And I just want to go down a bit further and make sure on our ordering, Y sort is enabled as well. Let's save that and see what our game is like. All right, here we are. Now remember, if I go down and I appear on top of the tree, this hasn't worked. If I appear behind the tree, it's been successful. Down we go. Look at that. How easy was that, right? We've done a few little tick boxes and voila, we've got some Y sorting. So it works for the tree. Does it work for this giant rock as well if we get behind him? Yes, it does. Now, I could change my collision shape for that rock, which would allow me to get a bit further behind it as well if I wanted to do that. But you can see clearly that this as a principle works. So we're in front of our tree when we're below it. We go up behind our tree. Perfect. That's Y sorting done. That was all I wanted you to do for that, and it was really, really easy. So we're going to spend a lot more time on our next bit, which is setting up our map in ways that we think will make it a bit more engaging and a bit more, adventure inspiring, if that makes sense. So let's talk a tiny bit about some more theory with that, and then we're going to jump back into our map. Okay, so what you really need to get done in this lesson is making sure you've got collision shapes on all those tiles that need them, and you've used those collision shape enabled tiles to make some world boundaries, so we can't just walk off our map anymore, as well, of course, as the Y sorting. We want you to also experiment with gating, so channeling your player in the direction you want, giving them options for exploration. So again, using those collision shape enabled objects that you have to sort of emulate some of that Zelda map that we saw. And what you might like to do is try and create the first screen of your game. So using the tiles we got, try and make a good chunk of it as high quality as you can. Make sure you got all the different trees and shades of grass and types of cliff, and maybe there's water. Really experiment with trying to create a really interesting first screen for your player to explore. That's our must, may, might for today. So to debrief, what we've managed to do today is we've enabled our Y sorting, we've added collision shapes to the relevant tiles, and implemented some of that game design theory. What are we doing next time? Well, we're going to be creating our first enemy, and I'm really looking forward to that one. And the quote I'd like to leave you with this week is from French-Algerian philosopher Albert Camus, and it is, "We are all special cases." I'll see you next time.